The United States still claims to have 8,000 tons of gold reserves in order to pretend that it's worthy of being the reserve currency. So this is why it's important for China to make additional gold disclosures over the years as part of its movement towards making the renminbi reserve currency. China could have 4,000 tons of gold right now and not have done anything at all the least bit fraudulent or dishonest, because all the gold it adds from its domestic sources never has to be reported.
Hey friends, thanks so much for tuning in. We have back on the line our good friend Jeff Nielson from Bullion Bulls Canada. Jeff, how are you today?
Pretty good, and it's always a pleasure to be here.
Hey, it's always a pleasure to have you, man. We haven't spoken since April. I mean, can you believe all that's changed since April? And I'm just now getting you back on? I need to have my head examined.
Well, you got your hands full, and I mean, lots of people to talk to. So, I mean, you can't talk to me every week. That's just the way it is. But, we got lots to talk about. So, what are you interested in today?
Well, you and I were joking on email. Maybe I should get a little window at the top of SGT report with a webcam, just focused on you. It's Jeff Nielson 24/7, all day, every day.
Well, from my perspective, that would be ideal. But I'm sure some of your other people in your audience have a different sort of perspective on that.
Well, we don't need to watch you shower. I mean,
well, that's true too. Yeah, maybe just 12 hours a day, Jeff Nielson.
All right, 12 hours a day. Jeff Nielson, 1224, 365. All right, brother. Well, let's talk a little bit about proof that the 5-year low for gold is a fraud. You just wrote about that over at sprottmoney.com. As we see silver literally be gutted. I mean, did you ever think we'd see silver go from 48 all the way back down to 14 below the cost of production? I mean, that alone is a mind bender. But what do you make of the gold price, Jeff?
Well, there's two elements to the craziness. There's the price itself and the fact that our markets are so absolutely corrupt that the bankers can march prices to any crazy number they choose. But then there's just also the demand side of things, which is, we know that most of the world reacts to lower prices by buying more. That's the rest of the world is sane. They live in a mantra of buying low and selling high, while all the crazy people in the West do the exact opposite. We don't buy anything unless it's really, really expensive. Real estate, Dow stocks. We buy all those, but if something's cheap, then we shun it.
Yeah.
Buy low, sell high. That expression doesn't exist in the West.
Well, and it seems for many of us, it's the old adage of buy high, sell low. I mean, this is what they're doing. They want to shake confidence. They want to shake everybody out of gold. They want to shake everybody out of silver. They want to keep the con game going, which is the fiat dollar. They want to make sure that their fiat currencies remain king. But that paradigm is shifting. I mean, that's all we've been covering for years here, is that the paradigm is shifting, Jeff. And if you take a look at other nations and other currencies, you're not going to see a 5-year low in gold in most of those other currencies, are you?
No, and of course, this is another thing. There's been artificial manipulation of the dollar higher, and of course, the liars always just talk about the gold price in U.S. dollars. So this is another element of it. Of course, as you just say, in other currencies, we're not seeing the quote-unquote 5-year low. We're just seeing what other people look at as wonderful sale prices, and they're leaping into the market. Today, in fact, there was just a blurb over at Kitco on South Koreans basically doubling their gold demand because the prices are low. And filled with a whole bunch of other lies, but I mean, they couldn't stop the basic truth from filtering through there. And so this is what we see in the same parts of the world. The prices go down, demand goes up. Meanwhile, like I say, in the crazy West, prices go down, demand goes down.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is also a part of why this 5-year low is a fraud, because of the fact that we have this insane brainwashing that has clouded our minds to the point where we don't recognize the insanity for what it is.
Yeah, well, you and I do. I mean, so many don't, though. Our friends, neighbors, and colleagues are sound asleep and, comfy in their beds, looking at the ones and zeros on their brokerage account reports. And, you note here in this article, by definition, in every bear market, there must be weak demand or abundant supply or both. Is there weak demand in the gold market? And I'll take it a step further, Jeff. Look at the silver market. It's the absolute opposite of weak demand. We see all-time record high demand for silver eagles and for the coins coming out of the Royal Canadian Mint. We see all-time record demand. India's on track to import 33% of the world's physical silver supply in 2015 alone. Is this weak demand?
Well, this is the whole point. When we look at the minimal amount of facts that we can see through all of the smoke that they obscure things with, we see strong demand. And of course, on the other side of the picture, we don't see abundant supply. We see the opposite. We see critically low supply levels. So, as I pointed out in that commentary, a bear market is supposed to be weak demand and abundant supply, and we very clearly have abundant, massive demand and very limited supply. In other words, we have the definition of a bull market. We've never had anything other than the definition of a bull market all this time, and that's the only definition of a bull market. The nonsensical crap you get from the mainstream media defining bull markets in terms of prices, it's all just revisionism that they've invented. It has no basis in reality. Bull markets and bear markets are based on supply and demand, period.
Yeah. Well,
Price has
meanwhile,
nothing to do with it.
the world's central banks, which were previously selling 500 tons of gold per year to help keep the price down, are now buying roughly 500 tons of gold per year. That is a positive 1,000 ton per year swing in the gold demand, which you note, in a market that produces only a little less than 3,000 tons total of gold per year. Obviously, demand for gold isn't merely strong, it's ultra strong relative to previous years. That's the bottom line, Jeff. I mean, that's the fact. And then meanwhile, we have China announcing that it has voluntarily disclosed some of the gold which it's added to its reserves via domestic sources. Now, this is one that you're all over because everybody's wondering how much gold does China really have? I mean, our friend Alistair McLeod has for some time been saying it's easily north of 10,000 tons, but the 600-ton addition to China's official reserves since its last disclosure, Jeff, in 2009, which was officially in 2009 1,054 tons, has now been bumped up to 1,658 tons. That's a mere 604 additional tons in all of those many years, and nobody's believing a word of it. What are we not understanding, Jeff, about the way in which China has reported its new gold reserve total?
Well, the basis here is that gold is money. And so when we think about the reporting of gold transactions, this is the basis that readers have to focus on. That gold is money. And so in the world of international finance, when money crosses borders, it must be reported. So this is the whole point here. So when we hear monthly reports of Russia buying gold, additions to Russia's gold reserves, blah blah blah, and of course other nations as well, this is gold that Russia is buying on the open market. It's the gold is moving across jurisdictions, and so Russia is required to report it on a timely basis based on international financial reporting rules. Conversely, when whenever a nation adds currency reserves, money domestically from within their own economy so that there's no money crossing borders, then there is no requirement to report those transactions. So, of course, as most of your readers already know, China made a fanatical effort to ramp up its domestic gold mining industry. In a span of about 5 years, it tripled its gold production, which is almost unbelievable. And of course, it's been the number one gold producer for about nearly the last decade now. And none of that gold, not 1 ounce of that gold ever leaves the jurisdiction. So if we look at just the gold that China has been producing over the last decade or so, when it made this obvious national commitment to ramp up gold production, I would put China's gold reserves at a minimum of 4,000 tons based on what it could have added from that domestic gold mining alone. So, my number is somewhat more conservative than that of Alistair McLeod, but it's simply, this is all I can see. It's certainly possible that China could have more than this, but if it does have more than that, it would have had to have been doing so surreptitiously, buying gold through third parties, not reporting the transactions properly, and doing some sort of fraud here. China could have 4,000 tons of gold right now and not have done anything at all the least bit fraudulent or dishonest, because all the gold it adds from its domestic sources never has to be reported. So when China made this recent disclosure, it was a voluntary disclosure. And I suspect the amount of gold it disclosed was commensurate with the amount of increase in the size of its economy since that last reporting. So in other words, China wants to present itself as a bona fide candidate for the new reserve currency. And to do that, it has to convince the rest of the world that its economy has a bedrock solid foundation in all respects. And part of that, of course, is gold reserves. The United States still claims to have 8,000 tons of gold reserves in order to pretend that it's worthy of being the reserve currency. So this is why it's important for China to make additional gold disclosures over the years as part of its movement towards making the renminbi reserve currency. So it was, in some respects, forced to make some sort of disclosure at this point. And as we all know, it was just a tip of the iceberg disclosure.
Yeah, and isn't it also in their best interest to soft pedal the total gold holdings that they now probably retain? Because we even see the Mockingbird mainstream media, guys like Nicholas Larkin at Bloomberg, come out and say there should be a $64,000 gold price per ounce if China were to announce it had 10,000 tons of gold. And then he goes on in a rather poorly written article to explain why he believes the gold price would have to adjust to $64,000 an ounce. So we see even the Mockingbirds say, my God, take cover if we ever find out that China has 10,000 tons of gold. Meanwhile, China comes out and says, hey, we only have 1,658 tons. So no worries. This fiat game can continue for many, many more years. When in fact, maybe what's going on is China wants the gold price to remain as low as possible so they can deleverage out of the dollar and treasuries and all the other garbage they have in their portfolio to shore up physical, tangible assets like gold, like silver, like oil, like land, like waterworks, like everything else that they're doing, the BRICS nations. They actually want to build infrastructure over there in China through the AIIB and the BRICS, as opposed to the U.S. government using the John Perkins Confessions of an Economic Hitman model, which is to go in and destroy nations and steal infrastructure. Turned this into a long question, didn't I? So let's just go back to the thesis. Do you think China wants to keep the gold price, in at least paper price, as low as possible for as long as possible?
Well, this is something that part of your audience probably isn't too clear on because, they see China as a supposedly gold-friendly nation and then wonder, and of course Russia as well, and then wonder why they don't see these nations doing more in overt terms to support the gold market. And of course, you basically, summarize this with what you were saying previously. It's in the best interests of these big buyers to go along with the West's game. What's the West doing? It's depressing the price of bullion and propping up the prices of its worthless currencies, which of course China is holding, especially the US dollars, in abundant quantities. So China's sitting with drastically overvalued US dollars, which of course cannot continue much longer, and gold at a ridiculously suppressed price. And basically what the West is doing is handing it the world's gold reserves on a silver platter. Or a gold platter, sorry, more accurately.
Hmm.
And of course, so this is the whole point here. China's saying, well, why rock the boat? If the West wants to hand us the world's gold on a gold platter at bargain basement prices, which we can buy with our worthless Western currencies, who are we to argue? They're going to milk this for as long as they can, and then, when implosion is imminent, it's at that point in time that we'll likely see China and or Russia make overt moves to shore up the bullion market and to come clean with their own gold holdings. Because, of course, the same thing applies to Russia. See, Russia is currently the #3 gold producer in the world. And so while Russia has been making these regular declarations about the gold it's buying, as I was saying earlier, those are only its international transactions. So if we look at Russian gold mining over the past several years and all the gold that Russia could have been secretly accumulating from its domestic gold mining industry, Russia could easily have total gold reserves of 3,000 tons or more. And so if we look at the world in realistic terms, and even using my relatively conservative numbers that put China at over 4,000 tons of gold and Russia at over 3,000 tons of gold, those are likely now the #1 and #2 nations in the world in real gold holdings, because we know the U.S. numbers are totally ludicrous. It's nothing but paper. And the other European numbers are equally fraudulent because they claim their gold is being held by the U.S. So, this is the thing. China and Russia are likely #1 and #2 in the world already in total gold reserves. Both nations have much more than they're reporting. And both of these nations can be doing this secret gold accumulation totally legally, without anything illegitimate being done in the way that the West normally operates.
So, okay, let's dig into this then just a little bit further. This is important. If the world believes, and I don't know how much of the world still believes this, I think the the slumbering, sleeping American sheeple believe it. But if the world believes that the U.S. government still holds 8,000 tons of gold, some of which is purported to be at Fort Knox, some of which is purported to be at the New York Fed, but 8,000 tons of gold to support the world's reserve currency, the petrodollar. Let's just say, Jeff, that the world were to find out that all that gold had been leased out or hypothecated or rehypothecated or stolen. And then let's say that Nicholas Larkin's thesis, and I bring that up a lot because people have to keep in mind if Bloomberg is saying 10,000 tons of Chinese gold equals a $64,000 gold price, that equates to hyperinflation in my mind. That certainly equates to the death of the dollar. So let's go back to Larkin's thesis. China has
Well,
10,000 tons
sorry.
of gold. What happens if the world finds that out and at the same time finds out that the United States has been lying about its 8,000 tons and the United States is not only bankrupt on paper, but bankrupt completely in reality because they don't have 8,000 tons of gold? Suddenly we're staring at a gold price that is unimaginable and people standing at stores that have no food. Take a look at what's going on in Venezuela. Take a look at what's going on in Greece. That could be coming here, Jeff.
Well, certainly that could be coming, but the point that we also have to keep in mind is what could be happening simultaneously to that is people standing in line looking to get a hold of precious metals from dealers, and the dealers being out of bullion. And this is the whole point. We have, of course, China and Russia and furiously accumulating gold for their own national treasuries, and China openly encouraging its own citizens to buy gold. We have, of course, the people of India perennially loading up on gold themselves, and this is in markets where we know there is a large annual supply deficit. So the point is when China and Russia figure the jig is up and decide to fully come clean about their gold holdings, it's very like, and of course, when the whole Ponzi scheme system we have starts to implode, it's very likely this is already timed to coincide with exhausting the remaining stockpiles of bullion. And so the point here for those who haven't been clued into what's really going on, who haven't already been accumulating bullion as their real money for when the ultimate financial crisis hits our economies, uh, trying to do so when the crisis actually occurs may be impossible. There will very likely be no more bullion around except what's privately being held by those who were sane enough to accumulate it before the crash.
All right, well, then let's talk about the crash. I'm not asking you to put a timeline on it. We both know that that's a fool's errand because the powers that be still control the paradigm. They still control the paper markets, and as long as they can get away with their crimes, it's hard to say when the collapse comes. But a lot of people have been putting their finger on that September-October time frame, saying that something bad is coming. We see all sorts of evidence that the government, the United States government, is preparing for a collapse. What do you make of the collapse as you sit there in Canada looking down at us poor souls here, we poor souls here in the United States, Jeff? When could the collapse come? What do you make of this September-October timeline?
Well, for several years, I would have been in total agreement with you that trying to predict, when, quote unquote, it was a really difficult task. And primarily it's because never in my wildest dreams did I believe that the criminals could hold this system together this long. If I would have even considered that possibility, then, I might have come up with this time window myself 5 years ago, because the point here, and it was originally pointed out to me in a clip by, the name slips my tongue at the moment. In another clip I was listening to, uh, pointing out how previous over the last two bubble and crash cycles, they've been deliberately timed to coincide with the U.S. election cycle. And of course, there's a real simple reason for this. You've got the two-party dictatorship in the U.S., where the one bank controls both halves, and they pretend that there's this opposing dynamic in the U.S. political system, and then they just alternate between them. So of course, with the two-party dictatorship now generally getting to serve 8-year terms, not rather than just 4-year terms, they allow the one party to enjoy its time in the sun, and then of course, as the banksters are ready to trigger the crash, they use the outgoing regime as the scapegoat. Before, in the last crash, it was the Bush regime that was the scapegoat. In the next crash, of course, it's going to be the Obama regime that's the scapegoat. And then, of course, depict the next party that's coming in is the white knight. And so the hilarious part here is that 8 years ago, the Republicans are banished and disgraced for supposedly being responsible for crashing the economy. Now, of course, it's the Democrats that are going to be banished and disgraced for supposedly crashing the economy. And what are the U.S. electorate going to do? They're going to bring back the Republicans. So, that's a solution. And I mean, so this is the insanity we're looking at. So, the timing seems to be very easy to focus on at this point, and it may not be September or October. I mean, it could even be as late as the spring of next year. All it has to be is somewhat proximate to the end of the Obama regime, so that they can be the scapegoat tagged as the villains responsible, quote unquote, for the crash, and of course, nothing ever sticks to the bankers themselves.
Well, then let's talk about this election cycle here in the United States before we let you go. You know as well as I do that the Bush and Clinton crime families have been in power. Boy, the Bush family specifically, going all the way back to Prescott Bush when he rubbed elbows with Wall Street industrialists and Wall Street money powers back
And
in the
Hitler.
30s, and Hitler, absolutely. These are very, very bad people, and it's always been my contention that the Bushes created the Clintons, but now they rub elbows at the highest levels of power. And in 2016, they will give us, whether we like it or not, and they'll call it democracy. You have a choice, make it. You get Jeb Bush or you get Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton specifically being an overt criminal and Jeb Bush being a covert criminal connected to many bad things, and we don't need to get into all that right now. We don't have time, but I wanted to ask you about Donald Trump because many are referring to him as a demagogue, and I don't think that that's out of line. I don't think that under a Donald Trump presidency anything will change. And when I say that, I really want to look at the big picture and just point out that Donald Trump is one of those politicians who's saying a lot of the right things and he's pointing fingers at a lot of the right people. But at the end of the day, the GOP, which is corrupt, will not let him get the nomination, which will set us up for Hillary and Jeb. But even if they did let him get the nomination or he somehow got it and he somehow wound up in the White House, he will not point the fingers at Israel. He will not point the fingers at endless unconstitutional wars of aggression. He will continue to say we need to have a strong military. He will continue to ride the line for this military-industrial complex. His daughter Ivanka converted to Judaism before marrying a high-powered fellow by the name of Jared Kushner. And, again, I just want to just point this out because I've heard many call him a demagogue. I think it was Andy Hoffman who specifically called Donald Trump a demagogue, and I think that's accurate. I don't think we're going to get any change, any real change, under a Donald Trump presidency, but I don't think we're going to get a Donald Trump in the White House. Are we?
Well, I look at the current dynamics in the U.S. political race, and it just looks weird to me because, as I just finished describing, if we look back at the pattern over, in particular, the last 16 years, what the pattern says is that we're going to get a Republican president in the White House next time. But yet you look at the actual dynamics, and once again, you've got this massive field of clowns on the Republican side. Of course, in 2008, it was very clear that this was done deliberately, create this cast of political midgets on the Republican side so that Obama couldn't possibly lose. And yet, we're now seeing a very similar looking Republican field for the 2016 election, which, would seem to be setting us up for a Hillary coronation, but that breaks the pattern. So I have to ask myself, is something very dramatic going to occur that's going to make the current dynamics in the U.S. political race irrelevant? That there's already some script put together that's going to, totally blow apart the race and redefine it in terms of the script, and very possibly that script is going to be crafted in such a way to elevate one of the Republicans far above the rest. And of course, you've already popped out the name there. There's a Bush in the field, so that's the most likely fellow. So, that's what I hold out as a possibility here, because if we simply look at the dynamics as they exist today, it doesn't make any sense. Donald Trump, as you just pointed out now, is, connected to the Jewish crime syndicate himself. So it's hard to imagine that he could just, leap into this race with the powers that be totally opposed. So, and yet he's essentially functioning in the role of berserker right now. He's kind of destroying the Republican field single-handedly.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this is why I say I look at the dynamics right now and it just looks really, really weird to me. And so I'm expecting some major event to totally change the picture of the political landscape in the U.S. very shortly.
Yeah, and just to flush that out, you said the Jewish crime syndicate. I just want to flush that out as it relates to Ivanka and her husband, Jared Kushner, and her conversion to Judaism. Jared Kushner is an American businessman and investor. This comes from Wikipedia. He's a principal owner of Kushner Properties, his family's real estate holding and development company, and the New York Observer, a newspaper publishing company which he purchased in 2005. He is the son of American real estate magnate Charles Kushner and is married to Ivanka Trump, the daughter of American business magnate Donald Trump. The only reason I read that, and I do not believe the Jews are the source of every problem on the planet, I think it's the Zionist entity and the most powerful people that use the cloak of Israel as their cover to do terrible, terrible things. And of course, this goes all the way back to the Rothschilds at the very top of the heap, the Balfour Declaration, and the creation of Israel to do the bidding of essentially the Rothschilds. And Jeff, I've long considered the Rothschilds the only private family that I know of on planet Earth that owns nuclear weapons through their proxy Israel. It is important to mention this connection because at the end of the day, one of the most powerful lobbies on the face of the planet, certainly in this country, is AIPAC. And our sons and daughters will continue to have to spill their blood in unconstitutional wars of aggression around the planet in this endless war on terror. And that's the point I wanted to make.
Well, and I always deliberately use the phrase Jewish crime syndicate specifically to make it clear that I'm not some wacko anti-Semite, trying to, as you point out, blame Jews for everything.
Right,
Because
nor I.
the whole point here is that we're talking about a very microscopic segment of the Jewish population. But the point is that all crime syndicates are ethnically oriented. The mafia wasn't just a group of criminal businessmen, it was Italian criminals. And of course, when we talk about gangs, the gangs are always identified in ethnic terms. Criminals associate ethnically. So this is the whole point. It's not that there's a quote unquote world Jewish conspiracy, but there is a Jewish crime syndicate, and they're currently the kings of the castle right now.
Yeah, that's interesting. And just to flush that out historically, if we go back to 9/11, and we go back to Donald Rumsfeld, actually the day before 9/11, admitting that the Pentagon cannot account for $2.3 trillion in transactions, his words. Sitting at the head of the Pentagon, I believe as the comptroller, was Dov Zakheim, who has since fled back to Israel. And since then, Jeff, we've uncovered this delicious news. They now admit they can't account for over $8 trillion in transactions. $8 trillion. If there's ever been a greater example of a looting of a nation, I can't imagine what it is, Jeff.
Well, I go back even further to when I was, doing some examination of the accounting of the Bush regime, because of course, that was when things, really went totally insane at the beginning of the insanity. And I'm looking over their annual statements of the U.S. government's finances, and there's this massive category of off-balance sheet transactions. Now, what how can a national government in their own national accounting have an off-balance sheet at all? I mean, this is this. It's not like a bank, where there's a specific set of rules on what is quote unquote on balance sheet and what is off balance sheet. Our governments are supposedly our representatives, and everything they do, they're supposedly doing in our name. So there can only be an on balance sheet. So what is the off balance sheet? And of course, during the years of the Bush regime, they were claiming that these off-balance sheet transactions had produced a surplus of over $2 trillion. And of course, that $2 trillion was what depressed the Bush budget deficit numbers so that they weren't even more extreme and outrageous. And so, where did that $2 trillion come from? Well, very possibly it's profits from the CIA drug cartel.
That's right.
So we know, of course, that the CIA runs the global drug trade. That was the reason for invading Afghanistan, to get the poppy fields back in production. And of course, we have numerous people that have blown the whistle there. So I mean, the point is that this this national fraudulent accounting goes well back, and it's institutionalized. The U.S. government has an off-balance sheet.
Yeah.
It openly acknowledges it's doing stuff that it won't tell you about, in terms of its finances. So I mean, what other entity other than a crime syndicate operates in that manner?
Yeah, and the municipalities, the cities run the same way with the CAFRs, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Reports, which are never disclosed publicly and hide millions and millions and millions. In the cases, and in the case of big states, you're talking about billions and billions of dollars in assets, off-balance sheet transactions. That is the modus operandi of a criminal institution or criminal corporation would be to
Hide what you're
hide.
doing.
Yeah, to hide everything on off-balance sheet transactions, and it just gets me back to the conversation I just had recently with Bix Weir again. You don't own what you think you own if you're sitting there with your brokerage account statement, because the DTCC, which is expressly whose job it is to settle transactions, all stock transactions at the end of the day, can't account for hundreds of millions of daily transactions thanks to high frequency trading. And then there's Seed and Company at the end of the trail that all of these assets are just put into the name of. It's just a complex web of absolute criminality, Jeff. And the reason we have these conversations is to attempt to document it for posterity's sake, and to attempt to help protect those who are listening. Maybe they can wake up. Maybe we can wake up a few more people before this thing comes down.
Well, there's just one concept you just introduced there that I want to spend a moment to flesh out because it's very important. And you mentioned the words control and the words ownership. And now here's the point, is that back when we had legitimate societies, we were focused on the concept of ownership because in societies which observe the rule of law, ownership is the supreme concept. However, we, of course, as you and your audience know, we no longer have rule of law societies. We have a lawless crime syndicate running our governments. And so when the rule of law is absent, then all of a sudden ownership is no longer the supreme element in the economic system. It's control. And so, for instance, when I write about the one bank, and I'm sure your audience is familiar with that paradigm now, I talk about how it, quote unquote, controls 40% of the global economy. How much does it actually own? I don't know. It's not relevant because we have a crime syndicate system, so it's only a matter of control. And of course, we look at the big banks. The big banks control basically all the wealth. And of course, we own much, if not most, of the wealth that's in these big banks. But the point is when the crashes occur that we know are coming, and when the bail-ins occur that we know are coming, what's going to happen is the banks who are controlling all of these financial assets are going to suddenly own all these financial assets, because when the smoke clears after the bail-in, those are the entities that are going to be sitting holding everything. So this is the whole point here. People have to focus on control, not ownership. This is why, of course, we constantly tell people to have physical control over their own bullion. You don't have bullion accounts. You don't allow someone else to be holding your bullion for you unless you're doing so as a means of diversification. Part of your bullion may be, say, stored in an account in some other country or something like that. But, generally speaking, we have to control our own wealth and our own financial assets. And of course, this is why the war on cash is such a heinous threat to our economic liberty, because the criminals are now trying to force us to put all of our wealth into financial institutions, i.e. the criminal banks, so that the criminal banks will control everything, and that just means they'll soon own everything.
Yep.
So this is the thing people have to focus on: control your own assets.
Yep, that's right. It sounds trite to say if you don't hold it, you don't own it. We've been saying it for a long time, but I think that's definitely true as it pertains to any of these financial assets. I mean, my God, if you're going to be in stocks, you better get that stock in your name and delivered to you from your broker. And if you're going to be in gold and silver, you ought to be in physical, and you ought to get it in your possession. And just one last word on the cashless society, Jeff. I think you hit the nail on the head. The other reason the criminal syndicate wants to eliminate cash is so that they can eliminate the risks of bank runs. As we've seen in Greece, if everybody's on an electronic currency or an electronic dollar or an electronic form of settlement, they can just limit your available funds on a daily basis to $60, $60, and call it a deal. No risk of a bank run then.
Yeah, it's just further element of absolute control, and the obvious fascism that is just sweeping across our nations. We see it in the political terms, in terms of the UK moving to ban free speech, Spain banning public protest, but of course it's happening. The economic fascism is even more pervasive, and it's tightening the noose around the throats of all of us.
Tightening the noose, that's right. We can feel the blood flow being cut off to our brains. And it's scary, man. It's definitely scary. That's why we're trying to document this collapse, because it's happening. I know A lot of people don't see it. Our friends, neighbors, and colleagues, a lot of these people do not see it, but more and more people are waking up as the tyranny envelops the nation. As we've seen, mandatory vaccines bills being signed into law in California, despite the people saying hell no. It's really out of control at this point. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us, and let's drive some warranted traffic to your terrific website. Just tell people the web address, will you?
Sure. My main site is bullionbullscanada.com. And let me just mention to your audience, we've just been through some trials and tribulations with changing servers and upgrading our software. That's all behind us now, so people should be able to reliably access the site now. And I also do work for Sprott Money as a contributing writer, and that's also a wonderful site which puts out a lot of great information for people.
All right, very good. It's bullionbullscanada.com, and of course, Sprott Money. Our guest has been the one and only Jeff Nielson from Bullion Bulls Canada. Jeff, thanks again, man.
Thanks for having me.
Guys, and thank you so much for tuning in. We very much value you, and thanks for supporting us over at SGT Report. And if you like this video, please say so. Give it a thumbs up. Share it within your sphere of influence. Let's try to wake some folks up before the collapse hits. And thanks for your support at the Liberty Mill and thephaser.com as well. We really appreciate it. I hope you have a terrific week ahead. God bless. Bye-bye.